How to Sew the Beach Hut Row by Amber Makes. Make this gorgeous trio of beach huts decorated with their own mini bunting to keep things inside and decorate your home. Cutting out. Take the fabric panel from your kit and give it a press, and if you have a good look at it, you can see all of the pieces are labelled with the name of them is just above each piece. So what you need to do is cut out each of the pieces around the outer printed lines. The seam allowances are all included, and pin the label to them. With the bunting flags, there's a row at the top and a row at the bottom. Cut them out as one whole piece rather than individually. It's a lot easier for sewing with later. So make sure that you cut it. There's lots of pieces on here, obviously, so make sure you cut them all out. You'll also need some wadding, the details for the list in the instructions. Some bondweb, if you want to use this for the bunting flags, it's a bit easier. And you'll need some string for the mini bunting. You can use like garden string or nylon cord, but just something narrow for the bunting. And some LED tea lights. Make sure they're LED so they don't set fire to your little beach huts. And that's everything that you will need, and it's listed in the instructions. Now you can see here I've cut everything out and I've put them into piles. So each of the beach huts has the same pieces. So beach hut 1 has a front outer and a back outer, and a right side outer and a left side outer. And then it also has the lining pieces. So it's got the front lining, the back lining, the right side lining, the left side lining. They all say beach hut 1, so you know which is which. You've got a base and you've got a base lining, the little rug on it. You've got the 2 roof pieces and the 2 roof lining pieces. So put all of the beach hut 1 pieces into one pile so you don't get them mixed up. Although they are all the same size, all the beach huts, so you could mix them up if you wanted to, if you wanted different coloured insides to outsides. But that's entirely up to you. This is Beach Hut 2, this is the red one, so you can see it's got all of the outer pieces, all the lining pieces, all the base. And then Beach Hut 3 is the green one. And that has, again, everything. So you can see I've pinned all the labels to the top edge of the right side. And then as I'm assembling them, I will know which one is which to not get mixed up. And then with the bunting flags, as I said, cut around them like this. So you've still got the white fabric around them. When you come to assemble the bunting, it's easier if you keep them like this for now. So that's everything cut out. Keep them in their individual piles because we're going to start sewing them together. Adding the wadding. So take the wadding that's listed in the instructions and place it glue side up, and then place all the lining pieces for all 3 beach huts right sides up on top. There's enough so that you can leave a small space between them just to make it easier for cutting out. So following the manufacturer's instructions, press it into place until they're all cut. They're all fixed nicely. Then you just need to cut around the outer edge. So the wadding needs to line up exactly with the edge of the raw fabric piece. So I'm just showing you cutting out one of the lining pieces here. So I cut it down the side all the way along. Make sure you don't cut into the fabric. You're just trimming the wadding so that it's the same size all the way around. And that's one of the pieces lined. This is what will give your beach hut some structure and make it stand up. Repeat that to cut out all of the lining pieces so that every lining piece is backed by wadding. I find it easier and neater to have the lining pieces backed by wadding rather than the outer pieces. It just works better for assembly. So that's all the lining pieces for beach hut 1. And then repeat that with beach hut 2 and beach hut 3. And although you'll make one beach hut at a time, it's easier to press and trim the wadding to all 3 beach huts in one go. It's more fabric efficient because you can get them all close together. So once that's done, you're all ready now to start sewing up the first beach hut. Making the pieces. The 3 beach huts are all made in the same. We're going to start by making beach hut 1. So take the front out and the front lining. You need to sew them together. First, you need to decide, do you want to cut out the door to let the light shine through? With my beach huts, I just cut out the windows. But if you want to cut out the door, which means you can see inside better, this is how you do it. First of all, on the front outer, draw around the edge of the door outline, not the door frame, but the door, just so you can see these lines better. And then place this right sides facing with the front lining. It's exactly the same size, so it will match up. And then pin it together all the way around. I will show you in a moment how to do it if you are not leaving the door open, but this is if you want to do it open. And what you can do is leave the doors open on some of the beach huts, but not all of them, just to vary it. But it is entirely up to you. You can see the picture I've done at the end of all of them with the doors closed. So just choose what finish that you want. You need to leave a turning gap of 1.5 inches in the centre of one side. So just mark and measure the centre and then measure either side. So you've got your 1.5 inch gap. Now start stitching one side of the turning gap. And if you've left the door open, stitch around the door. So you pivot your needle to stop stitching around the door and then go all the way around, leaving the turning gap unstitched. So it will look like this. You can see I've stitched all the way around, the turning gap's unstitched, and I've gone around the door. Now trim off the corners. This is so that you can reduce the bulk. So when you turn it right sides out, there's less fabric in the corners. So just trim them off across and then trim the seam allowance a little bit either side. And then on the inside of the door, cut it quite close, about 1/8 inch inside the seam. This is because the less fabric you have here that need to the finish, but obviously the stitching needs to be strong enough. So don't go too close, but about 1/8 inch is okay. So now you've cut out the door section, and then again trim off the corner and then reduce the bulk on the seam by trimming off a little bit along the seam like this. And then in the corners of the door, just snip, just very slightly into the corner. It just helps it to open out, but making sure you don't cut the stitches. And then you can trim off the rest of the corners of the beach huts. Again, always trim across the corner and then remove a little bit of the seam allowance either side of that. You then will have less bulk in it when you turn it right sides, particularly because you've got the wadding as well. So now you've trimmed it all. You now need to press the seams over to one side because you can't press them open. So just press the seams over to one side, fold them over to one side and then press them. This just helps you to get the seam to be laying right on the edge when you come to turn it right sides out. It takes a few minutes, but you will find it's easier to get the seams laying right on the edge. And then when you get to the turning gap side, you'll also need to fold and press the seam allowance on the lining on the other side of it as well. So for the outer side, we just fold them over to one side. With the opening to the door, although it's a very small seam allowance because you've trimmed it, just see if you can just fold it over a little bit and press it. It will help you later. Even though that's a bit fiddly, it will help to get the seam laying right on the edge. And you can see here with the turning gap, fold the edge of the turning gap over on both sides because that needs to be folded to the inside so it stays like that when you sew it closed later. Now once that's done, you can turn it right sides out. Now if you've left the door like this so it's open, it does take a little bit of time because you've got to turn it all through that turning gap and get through both sides of the door. It will all come out, but just take your time to gradually ease it. Just push a little bit of the beach hut through the turning gap and then pull it out like this. Push a little bit and turn it out. So just work your way all the way along, just easing it, the whole thing through. And then when it's finished, it will look like this. So use your point turner or the stick from your turning tool set to just push out all the edges. I use the blunt end first to just get the corners out because I can't get my fingers inside there. And then I use the pointy end to point out the corners. Again, because you've trimmed those seam allowance, the seam allowance is very close to the stitching. So push it very slowly. Push the fabric onto the tool rather than the tool into the fabric and you're less likely to pierce the stitching. But taking the time to get all of these corners pushed out neatly means that when you sew all the beach hut pieces together later, it will be a lot easier. So once that's all done, make sure the edges of the turning gap are still folded under. Roll those seams between your fingers all the way around so that the seams are laying right on the edge and all the points are nice and crisp. You can go back again and push your point turner in if you are finding that they're not, but it will be easier to sew them together. So once you've done that, you just need to sew the turning gap closed. So I've given it a nice press here. It will stay under, but it's just a lot easier when you sew all the pieces together if you've actually sewn this turning gap closed. So just take needle and thread, push it through one end of the turning gap and work 2 or 3 stitches on top of each other to secure the thread, and then slip stitch it close by working your needle under the fold of the fabric on one side and then over to the other side, so you're working a vertical stitch from one side to the other, and that the thread actually runs underneath the folds of the fabric on either side. So all you will see is a tiny vertical stitch going from one side to the other. This just holds it closed. I did try top stitching around the edges of these pieces, but it didn't look as nice. I think it gave it a more rounded edge to leave them untop stitched. You can if you prefer, and then you don't need to slip stitch the turning gap, but I just found it gave a more rounded edge by not top stitching them and leaving them like this. And then that's your front outer finished. If you've left the door open, that's what it will look like. Now, if you don't want to leave the door open, just sew together, this is another one that I've done, all the way round, leaving that turning gap, but sewn right across the bottom of the door. Trim all the corners and edges in exactly the same way as you did with the one where I left the door open, but obviously you won't need to trim around the edge of that door because you're not leaving that open. So once you've trimmed it all the way round, you can then turn it right sides out. This is a lot easier if you haven't done the door, a lot quicker, just because you haven't got to fiddle about with the door section. It just turns out a bit quicker. But as I say, do alternate across the beach huts if you want to. You could just leave the middle one's door open if you prefer. And then push out all the corners with your fingers, using again your point turner. And take your time here to make sure those points are really nicely pushed out when you make all the other pieces, because in a moment you'll be making the back and the sides and the roofs. Obviously they don't have the cutout bits like this, so in a moment you will be making the others, and you do all in the same way as I'm doing this. So these are all the other pieces. So you've got the back, the right side, the left side, the two roof pieces and the base, and you can see I've sewn them all right sides facing. And then once they're all turned right sides out, pressed, and the gap is slip stitch closed, this is what all your pieces will look like. So you have front outer, back outer, right side, left side, and they're all beautifully lined, and you've got all of the insides of the beach hut that you can see. There's the roof, and there's the base with its little rug on the bottom. So all of the pieces are now made. Cutting out the windows. So decide which windows that you want to cut out. For my beach huts, I cut out both of them. To cut out one of the window, you need to sew around the outline first. So sew around the outer edge of the printed window frame. I started a little bit, just about half an inch above the bottom edge. And then I carefully sewed along the outer edge of the window frame. Work from the outer side of the piece. I shortened up my stitch length as well to about number 2, just because they made the outline a bit more secure. Pivot with your needle in the fabric and turn the fabric once you get to each corner. So go around all 4 sides, and then you need to stitch another line around the edge to make it stronger. So if you just carry on stitching over the first where you started, and then about 1 or 2 stitch lengths outside of the first row of stitching, stitch all the way around. This extra row just makes the window more secure and stops the stitching from coming along. So you can see here I'm stitching just outside, 1 or 2 stitch lengths outside, and always remember to pivot at the corner with your needle in the fabric, lift the foot and continue to the next corner. Once you stitch down the final side, you'll just need to stitch a little bit beyond the corner again, and then overlap the beginning of that second line of stitching. This just means you can work it all in one go. Reverse stitch to finish, and then cut the thread. And now you stitched work 2 rows of stitching all around the outside of the window frame. So now you need to cut out the window. So if you fold it in half like this and just make a little snip through all the layers, then you can get your scissors inside. And what I did was I cut from the centre up to the corners. You need to stop cutting about 2 fabric threads inside the seam line, because if you go right up to the seam line, then you might cut through the stitching, or the stitching will come undone. But that's why you've worked that extra row. It gives it extra strength. So if you go from the centre up to the corners, make sure you've got some small sharp scissors. You can then cut across between each corner. So just do this slowly and carefully. Make sure your scissors are nice and sharp, and cut out each section like this. So I said about 1 or 2 fabric threads just inside that inner stitch line. If you do cut through any of the stitching or you find the stitching's come off, you can always pop it back under your machine and re-stitch it. So work all the way around to cut the window. Now this is what helps the light to shine through if you're using LED lights, and also it enables you to look inside the beach hut to see all the pretty decorations that are inside, so for a really nice display. So for my beach huts I cut out both windows, but I didn't cut out the doors. But it's entirely up to you, you just need to decide how you want yours to look. So once you've trimmed it, you'll probably need to go over to the lining side and trim some of the fabric there, just because you tend not to cut through the whole thing. So trim all the way round like this. And then what you need to do is then pull the fabric threads, because what you'll find is you'll get some little bits of fabric threads sprayed. So if you just pull outside each one, you can then, any little fabric threads that come off, you pull them and you can just trim them off. So take your time here to make sure that that edge is really nice and neat, and then go back to the inside, the lining side, to trim it as well. So that's one of the windows now cut out, and it's really neat. Now if you want to cut the other window out, repeat that in the same way on the other side piece. Now you can at this point add any extra quilting details if you want to add definition, and it also makes the pieces a bit more structured. So for this I stitched around the door and around some of the outlines, but stitch from the outer side, not from the lining side, because that's the side that you're going to see. So with this you can see that I stitched all around the lines of the wood on the beach hut around the oar. I also sewed a little button onto the door handle for decoration. Again, I sewed around the edges of the bunting, but you don't have to do this, but it just adds a little bit of detail. And just use a slightly longer, like number 3 stitch length, and stitch on top of them all the way along. For the roofs, I stitched some horizontal lines to look like a bit like the tiles or the slates. And then for the floor, I stitched along the outside. So that's all your pieces finished. Assembling the walls. So now we're going to sew all of these walls together. So take the front and the right side and place them lining sides facing, so the right hand side of the front and the left hand side of the right side meet up. Now clip or pin them together at either end, because it's important that the tops and the bottoms meet up. So clip them together, and then you can ease them slightly in between the top and the bottom so that they fit exactly. It's important that the bottom edges meet up. So once you've clipped them together, then take the bottom pin or clip out, and with a matching thread, I've used a white thread for mine, push your needle through the bottom and leave a little bit of a tail to stop it coming out, and then work 2 or 3 stitches on top of each other, just so that the thread is nice and secure before you start stitching. And then you need to slip stitch the sides together. So at the bottom, I work a couple of over sewing stitches, because there's quite a bit of bulk in those corners. So if you work some over sewing stitches just through that bottom corner, then that will hold it nice and securely. And then you can slip stitch it together. So a slip stitch is worked where you work a horizontal stitch under the fold of the fabric on one side, and then bring it up. And then you'll have a vertical stitch going through to the other side. Only stitch through the outer fabrics of these 2 pieces, not into the lining, and then they will bend better when the wall is finished. It will fold round better. So horizontal stitch under the fold, across to from one side across to the other side, and then you'll only see a very tiny vertical stitch. You can over sew these if you prefer. It doesn't matter if the stitching shows up a little bit. It's a handmade item, so that's fine. It's not supposed to be completely invisible, but just keep the stitches small and close together so that you don't get any gaps in your walls. And then you stitch all the way up to the top. Now I found another way of doing it is I tended to slip stitch the bottom bit, but then I found it a little bit easier if I lay the 2 pieces flat on my table, and then you can work the stitches. It sometimes helps it just to keep it flatter, but you can either do it like I was doing it the first time, where you hold the 2 together, which I like to start with, but then I find it a bit easier when you get a little bit of the way up to do them flat together. You'll have to try various methods and see which one you prefer, but again, whether you're flat or you're holding them together, make sure that the slip stitches go through the fold of the outer fabric only, so that there's only a little stitch on the outside. But as you're working around the walls and you sew the base and the roofs on, you can try out a few different methods and see which one you prefer to do. But as long as the stitches are close together, it doesn't matter. When you get to the top, it's really important that you make this nice and secure, because obviously the wall, this seam will be opened out to form a right angle. So at the other end, work a few stitches on top of each other to secure the thread, otherwise it will come undone. And then poke your needle through to the lining side, and then thread the needle just under the fabric and out a little bit further down, so that you're not cutting the thread where the over sewing stitches end, but you're threading it through. That just makes it a bit secure. And now that's the front and the right side joined together. So you do the same thing to join the back to the other side of the right side, from sewing from top to bottom, and then join the other side piece to the other side of the back. So you have the 4 pieces joined together in a row, and they will look like this, all slips together in the same way. Now, to join all the walls together, you've got to join that other side piece to the other side of the front in exactly the same way. Clip it at one end and clip it at the other end, and then clip between. Because you're hand sewing this, if you find that for some reason your seam allowances, that the sides of these walls and fronts are slightly different, when you're sewing them together, you can ease them. If you've clipped them in enough places, you can ease them together. So again, start by over sewing 2 or 3 stitches on top of each other to make sure that the thread is really secure. Then you can snip off that end of thread. It's just if you pull it all the way through to start with, sometimes it can pull out. And then once you've done that, you just sew this seam together, these 2 sides, again, using a slip stitch and only working into the outer fabrics, not into the lining fabrics. Otherwise, they don't fold round at a right angle in the same way. So you can see, you can do this stitch in 2 motions, by going through one side, out and through the other side, or in one motion like this, where I go through one side and into the other side at the same time. And then stitch all the way along until you reach the top. And remember to work several stitches at this top, because it's really important that this stays secure. And that's why I always go through to the lining side as well. You can even work a few small over sewing stitches on this side as well, just to the lining. It doesn't matter if you're joining the lining just at the top bit here. And that makes it extra secure. And thread the needle through the fabric and out so that the end of the thread is inside. And now you've joined all the walls together. Now take the time now to put these seams on your ironing board and give them a good press. That just evens out any little creases and also creates nice right angles as well. So that's the walls all finished and joined together. Attaching the base. So place the base and the front together with the lining sides facing, so that the bottom edge of the front and the top edge of the base meet up. That just means you then have the inside the rug facing the right way. It's a square piece, so it doesn't really matter if you put it the other way. It's just if you want it to face the way that we've designed, then do it that way. Then clip it together at either end and then in the centre. You can double check at this point if you want the rug to be facing a specific way, that it is facing that way. Now, in exactly the same way as you did with the walls, push the needle through the outer fabric of the front piece and then work several stitches on top of each other to secure the thread, and then I'm just going to trim off that end. And now you need to slip stitch the base to the front. Remember, work through the outer fabrics only. At the beginning, I like to work a couple of over sewing stitches, and this just secures the thread, and then I can work the slip stitches. Because this is more awkward and more of a right angle than when you're doing the walls, I tend to work a few slip stitches, pull the thread, and then I'll do a couple of over sewing stitches just to hold it secure. So that's stitched it in place all the way along. When you get to the corners, just to make it secure and stable in the corners, work over sewing stitches at one corner, then bend it round and clip it across we're going across the side of the house now, and then clip it into place. So always clip or pin one side at a time before you sew it. You can't clip all 4 and then sew, you need to do one at a time. So when you move around to the next corner, so we're working on the bottom of the side piece, again, work 2 or 3 over sewing stitches. It's just that the slip stitches might bag a bit or become a bit loose, but those over sewing stitches help it to become secure. So again, I'm working through the outer of the base and the outer of that side piece. Just working those slip stitches. And I'm going to work a couple of over sewing stitches here and there, and it just tightens up the slip stitches so you can pull them a bit and then you can't see the stitches as much. So work round in the same way, doing one side, clip, pin and sew one side at a time until you get back to where you started. And once you get all the way round, you can see I've sewn it all on, finish off just like you did before, a few over sewing stitches. If you keep these stitches really small, then you won't be able to see them, and then thread your needle under the fabric, not through into the lining, just so that the thread comes out a little bit further off, and then clip it. And then your base is now neatly attached to the walls, and you can see inside. So that's that section of the beach hut finished. Adding the roof. So the 2 roof pieces are joined together in the same way that you joined the walls. So place them lining sides facing and clip them together along the top long edge. Clip them either end and then clip between. Then using a matching thread, so for this one I've used a grey thread because I'm only going to be working into the outer fabric of the roofs just like you did with the walls, but because this is grey I don't want it to show up, so just choose a thread that matches. Secure the thread by working a few over sewing stitches and then you can snip off the end. And then slip stitch the roof together all the way along the top. So I'm just working some small slip stitches through one side of the roof. I have to remember only working to the outer fabric, not the lining, and that will help the roof because this roof will open at an angle, not a right angle, but just a slightly smaller than your 90-degree angle, so it fits across the top of the beach hut. And then slip stitch it all the way along. You can either slip stitch it by holding the 2 pieces together. I did find it a bit easier to, when I got about halfway along, to do it flat. And to keep it together, if you are stitching, you can see I've put a pin in here just from one roof piece to the other. That just holds it together because if you're doing it flat, you're not clipping it. And I found it a little bit easier to pin across from one roof piece to the other. But keep the ends together with a clip, just because otherwise sometimes when you're sewing them you'll find that one piece can shift a bit. So if you keep both ends clipped together at the beginning and the end, it just helps you to, because you can adjust the fabric slightly to make sure that it meets up, but it just keeps those ends stable. So when you get to the other end, obviously it's really important that this is very secure. So just push your needle through and then stitch. And now with this side I'm going to sew a few more over sewing stitches into the lining so that the thread doesn't come undone at all, and then push your needle just under the fabric a little bit away along and then snip it off. And that's the 2 roof pieces joined together. You can give them a press. I would place them like this and give them a press, just evens it out a little bit. Now you can attach them to the house. Now the roof is bigger than the top of the beach hut, so it overhangs, and in order to measure this, if you lay the side of the house along that seam line and make sure it's central. You can measure this or judge it by eye, but you will find that the roof is bigger than the side. So what I did was measured it. I did it by eye, and then I just popped a pin where one side of the house is and where the others. So again, measure it if you want to, or you can just judge it by eye, and then pop a pin in at either side. And these marks will show you where to sew the front of the house to, because now it's central. So this bit is really important so that your roof sits centrally on top of the beach hut. So again, just double check that it's the same length as the side. Now take the front of the house, and where that pin is on the apex of the join of the roof, Place the top point of the apex of the front of the house at that pin mark and pin the two together. Now, working on one section at a time, pin the top of the front of the house, so the sloping bit. I'm just going to put that back in again because it came out, so that it's the same distance. So you can see that the amount of the overhang is the same distance all the way along. So pin it down to the bottom. So you can see now that the overhang on the roof is the same all the way down the side. So just pin that into place. And then you can bend it round and pin it down the other side. And you can see that the end of the roof also will overhang the side as well. So it won't meet exactly at the edge of the front of the house where the front joins the right or the left side seam, because it overhangs all the way around. So it looks like a proper beach hut. And then go around and pin the other side first. So get the back of the house, get the point of the top of the back of the house, place it where your pin mark is on the roof, and pin it into place. And then pin it all the way down the side. Again, you can judge it by, it's only a short distance. It's about 1/2 inch. You may find yours is a little bit less depending on your seams, but it's about a 1/2 inch overhang. And pin it into place down that side. It doesn't matter if you go through to the outer, but just make sure that's neatly pinned into place. And again, fold it round and pin it down the other side. And again, don't forget that the roof is longer than this slope bit of the beach hut back. So just make sure it's even and pin it into place. And now you can pin the roof to the side sections. So again, make sure that it's about the same distance, because obviously those side sections might bend in a bit. So just pull them outwards and just judge it to make sure that that overhang is the same all the way along. And pin it into place. I put 3 or 4 pins in each place just to make sure that it was held, because if you can pin this all in accurately and securely, it makes it a lot easier when you come to slip stitch the roof lining to the top of the walls. And you can always go around and adjust it. If you find your overhangs aren't quite right, you can just take your pin out, repin it, and you can get it just right. So now everything is pinned all into place and it's nice and neat. So now you can start stitching. You've got to stitch all the way around. You can start stitching wherever you want. I'm going to start on the top of the apex of the front. So just like you did before, push your needle through, use a matching thread. I've used a white thread here. Work a few over sewing stitches on top of each other just to secure the thread, and then slip stitch. Now this time you need to slip stitch into the lining of the roof and into the outer of the walls, so the outer of the front, sides and back, but only into the lining of the roof. It's really important you don't stitch into the outer of the roof, because you don't want those stitches to show. It will look untidy, but because you've got the wadding behind the lining, actually it's quite easy for that not to happen, because what happens is that the thread tends to go into the wadding and the lining and it doesn't go into the roof. But every now and then, every few stitches, just flip it, just have a look, because if you've got any stitches showing on the outer, you can just unthread your needle, undo it and redo them, but you really don't want to see these stitches on the outer. But you can see, because you've taken the time to pin it all correctly, actually slip stitching this into place is fine. Also, these stitches are going to be on the underside of the roof as well, so you're not really going to see them. So if any of them aren't really tiny, it doesn't matter too much, because you'd have to look right up inside the beach hut to see that. So once you've worked across the front, stitch across the side, up the other apex and round the other side. If you want to have your house open so you can use it as a little box to keep things in, just stitch it into place on one side and the 2 apexes of roof like I have done here, and leave that open. It will hinge open. It means you can look inside and you can store things in, particularly if you haven't cut out the windows. So this is what it looks like if you've stitched it into place all the way round. It's nice and neat, that the roof overhangs neatly all the way the side, and then you can just get one of these little LED tea lights and it will just pop in through the window. You don't have to put these in, but it's quite nice that it illuminates it. Even in the light, it gives it just a little bit of light. And when it's dark, it looks lovely. You can see inside. So that's Beach Hut 1, all finished. Beach Hut 2 and 3 are made in exactly the same way. You can see with them I cut out the windows. With this one, I did my quilting around the picket fence and I've put buttons on all the doors. There's Beach Hut 3, exactly the same with all of its decorations. So the trio of beach huts are finished. All you've got to do left to do now is make the little bunting that we're going to do next. Making the bunting. You can now make bunting to add to your beach hut. I found it easiest if I press Bondweb onto the back. So if you're going to do this, press Bondweb onto the back of each of the bunting triangles, but do it as one whole piece like I've done, and then cut round them. If you're not using Bondweb, then you can still make the bunting, just cut round the edge of the bunting flag. Well, they're diamonds, but they will become your bunting flags. You can still do it without the Bondweb, but it's just easier to use it with. So do it, press it on with as a whole piece, and then cut out all the flags that you want to use. And then you will have them like this. Now you need to decide how much bunting you want to make. You can have it draped across all of the beach huts, all the way around the front and the backs, just between them. So get your string, place it where you want it to be, and then you can decide the length. Now to attach the flags, measure 2 inches in from the left-hand side so you've got something to hang the string with. And if you're using Bondweb, peel off the paper backing, and then fold that little diamond shape around the string so that the string is at the top at the fold, and then fold it on top at that 2 inch mark, because that 2 inches is the extra for tying it up. Now if you've got Bondweb now, so you can just fold it together like this. If you just press with your fingernail up to the string and then press it into place, that will hold it together. If you're not using Bondweb, just pin it and then you can sew it into place in a moment. Now I measured then 1/4 inch to the right of that flag, because I found with these little bunting flags, 1/4 inch was about right. But obviously you can change that spacing if you prefer, depending on how much string. There's lots of flags. I had more than enough. I used 18 flags and 24 inches of string. All of this information is in the instructions where I tell you how many I used and where I placed them. So to put the next one in, again, put the string or cord inside so it runs along the centre, fold it over, and if you just press it with your fingernail just below the cord or the string at the top, that just holds it into place, and then press if you're using Bondweb and pin if you're not. And then continue in this way to attach all of them along the string and alternate the colours and the prints, because it just gives it a prettier look. And then it will look like this. So you can see I've pressed all of my little flags all about 1/4 inch apart, and I've left 2 inches of string at either end so that I can attach it. So decide how much bunting you want to make. Then to make it really secure, top stitch them into place. And if you haven't used Bondweb, you will need to do this. It takes a little bit of time by machine, but if you go slowly, you can sew just below the cord, across the top, down one side and up the other side. Or if you find it easier, you could just stitch this into place by hand with a little running stitch. And then you can attach your bunting to your beach huts. So what I did first was I pinned the end of my bunting to the top left corner of beach hut 1. And then I worked out that about 4 bunting flags would make it drape round. But again, you could have it straight if you prefer. I just wanted mine to come round into a little curve. So just pin them in place, because this means if you pin them to start with, you can then adjust it. And then I left 3 flags between that hut and the next one. Or what you could do is just cut individual lengths of the bunting and just attach them to each of the beach huts if you don't want them to join them all together. Or you could do one length that just goes around each of the beach huts. But just play with it and see what you prefer. Or you can leave it out if you don't want to have the bunting. And then I put another 3 flags between the next one and just pinned it into place, and then just draped it across. It just adds a little bit of detail to your beach huts to make it more fun. And then when that's done, you can then, once you're happy with the positioning, wherever you've put them, just sew them into place. And all you have to do is just take a needle of thread, matching thread to match your string, and just over sew the string to the beach hut in the position you want it to be, and that will hold it into place. If you want to cut off the end, then you can, or you could again just tack that underneath the roof if you want to be able to move it later. And to secure the thread, just thread it through the fabric underneath, so you're not cutting it off right to where you've stopped sewing. Just like that. And then continue in this way to just work a few little over sewing stitches to just secure the bunting in the place you want them to be. And beach hut row is now finished. It'll look beautiful to decorate your house at day, and when you turn them on, it will look all illuminated at night too.